Well, it's a glorious spring day here in Somerset, nothing like probably the 15th of November 1539, and behind me you can see Glastonbury Tor. That is the place where Richard Whiting died. He is the last abbot of Glastonbury Abbey. He died there, it was probably raining, being November, and worst of all, he was hung, drawn and quartered. The worst way to die. We're going to find out why, what that meant. I hope you can join me. I'm also going to be walking all the way to the top. The view's going to be incredible, so do stick around for that. So here I am planted on the ground on the way up to the Tor, where I can just tell you a little bit about Richard Whiting, who was placed on a hurdle, which is like a fence, and dragged to the very top in order to meet his fate. But what was this the end of? What is Glastonbury? I mean, you've probably heard of Glastonbury because of an extremely famous music festival that hasn't actually been running for that long. Glastonbury was actually a pretty big deal for 1,000 years and not for contemporary music, I can tell you that. Over there is a very modest town, but that is where there used to be Glastonbury Abbey, which was founded in the 7th century. Some say it was earlier. There's a whole story going back to Joseph of Arimathea, and there's the Glastonbury Thorn, but we'll get all into that on another video. But there was a monastic community there from the early times of Christianity in England, but it was really supercharged by Dunstan, who was actually a local boy, also from Somerset, from Boltonsborough. We'll go to his church and town of its village of birth in another video. He was the one that turned it into a Benedictine monastery. He added cloisters, it started to expand. There were lots of other mini monasteries that were posted across Somerset, and it just became this huge monastic empire, which was also enhanced and became richer because they started dredging the land, because this is marshland. Why is Somerset called Somerset? Because you can only live here in the summer, because the rest of the time it's flooded. The story goes when this place was founded, an awful lot of it was essentially still underwater, and that Glastonbury was some sort of an island. So, you know, that seems to be largely speaking true. But they undid all that after the Normans. For hundreds of years they were dredging and reclaiming land, putting sheep on it, doing all kinds of things and getting richer and richer and richer. So that by the time we were getting into the 14th century, the only abbey in England richer than Glastonbury Abbey was Westminster Abbey. And that was founded by Edward the Confessor, and of course is an extremely famous landmark. But Glastonbury is super famous too, but it's now known as a town of music, but also New Age and spiritualism. There's plenty of witchcraft that goes on here. It's really an alternative place, which is obviously not to everybody's taste, certainly not to my taste. The thing I'm always trying to get my head around though is why did the monasteries just disappear so easily, given how gigantic and powerful they were? Because that was Richard Whiting's fate. And I think one thing that I've just been reading about, and I don't think we fully appreciated, is the scale of the Black Death. So you had hundreds of monks all over England, thousands, tens of thousands. But by 1500, there were probably only 100 monks in Glastonbury Abbey. This huge abbey only had 100 monks, and that was the case all over England. And it feels like they had really peaked, and actually their heyday was probably the 10th and 11th centuries. And thereafter they were getting richer, but they were also kind of getting hollowed out. The Black Death was a gigantic killer, obviously, like half the population of England died. But because of also climate changed in particular ways, because climate's always been changing, it then became much harder to grow food. And the population of England didn't recover after the Black Death for hundreds of years. And so therefore I think what happened is when eventually Henry VIII came for the monasteries and Cromwell sent his men here to have a look around, I think most of the impetus for this monastic movement had actually, unfortunately, evaporated. It hadn't quite recovered from the 14th century and the Black Death. That's my theory anyway. I'd be really interested to know what others think. Maybe leave a comment below on that. But I think what we'll do next is think about the story of Richard Whiting and how he ended up being hung, drawn and quartered up there. Just waiting for a plane to go overhead. That's the thing when you live in Somerset, especially where I do near Yeovil, you don't tend to notice helicopters, particularly overhead, because helicopters are made, and so when people come to visit, they're just like, oh, there's a helicopter, and you're like, oh, is there? You sort of have an automatic noise cancellation for helicopter noise if you live where I live. So let's talk about Richard Whiting, who was actually born in Somerset, probably in about 1461. Early details are sketchy. He was probably from a wealthy-ish or maybe rich middle-class family of some sort, because they managed to get their son into this abbey, Glastonbury, which was a Benedictine monastery by that point. And of course, to us now, going into a monastery seems like some kind of career suicide or some life of seclusion away from everything else. You're turning away fame and riches and success or anything. But actually, it's like getting into Princeton or Harvard or Yale, or in Whiting's case, getting into Cambridge, because all of the monasteries, particularly the great ones like Glastonbury, had links with Oxford and Cambridge. Although they were still in their infancy as universities, they were seats of learning. So Whiting came here. He was educated at the Glastonbury Abbey and then went to Cambridge and was educated there. And he came back and worked his way up. And in 1529, he was unanimously elected to be the abbot of the monastery here, which is, of course, a very good sign. He was, by all accounts, a very kind and gracious man, very scholarly, and had a very, very good reputation, was also pious. And, of course, they were still raking in an awful lot of money. It's quite easy to be a nice guy when you're making a lot of money, isn't it? But a lot of money was still coming in through the monastery. And, of course, in his day, it had a reputation for being a site of pilgrimage because, of course, famously, the bones of Arthur were conveniently discovered. Arthur and Guinevere's graves were discovered in Glastonbury Abbey. The reason that's a little bit sus beyond sort of fairly obvious things is the fact that there was a big fire in the Abbey in the 1180s, I think it was. Let me just check my notes. 1184, there was a great fire. Henry II suddenly thought, oh, I need to get in on this. Maybe he's still trying to atone for his sins against Thomas Becket. So he sort of got involved. And then the project kind of ran out of money, and suddenly the Abbey was a little bit short with this huge building project it was involved with. And so, oh, what do you know? Would you believe that we found the graves of Arthur and Guinevere here in the site of the Abbey? You should come here on a pilgrimage. Well, I don't think I would believe that, and I'm prepared to believe some extraordinary things, including the birth, death, resurrection and ascension of our Lord Jesus Christ. So everything's on the table as far as I'm concerned, but that one seems to be pushing it a little bit, doesn't it? So he was enjoying all the wealth, Richard Whiting, in 1525 when he became abbot. But of course, we know the story that the nation kind of moved away from Rome. Henry VIII rather cynically needed that divorce and break with Rome, but was also opening the door to some sort of Protestantism. And then Cromwell sent his men to go around the lesser monasteries. Now, the other thing that we don't really think about is the fact that Cardinal Wolsey, who was an embodiment of social progress through the church, which is why Whiting going into the church was a brilliant career move. Unless you were born into a nobility, you wouldn't get a chance to be in that level of society. And Wolsey, the famously son of a butcher from Ipswich, became a cardinal, and he was the Archbishop of York. He'd already realised that some of these lesser monasteries were kind of letting the side down and had lots of monks rattling around and nuns rattling around in convents and sitting on money. So he was actually in the business of closing down some of those before Thomas Cromwell starts to get all the rap for doing it. But of course, we know why he was doing it. He was under orders. I don't think he himself was any fan of the Pope. But of course, it wasn't really monasticism that was the thing that was the problem. It was the obedience to the Pope in Rome. So if you were a Benedictine monk, your authority was derived from the Pope in Rome, and therefore the idea that you would need to swear that King Henry VIII is the supreme head of the church in England, and you essentially have to renounce your claim for the Pope to have any jurisdiction in England whatsoever. Well, that can't happen. And so when the commissioners came for the monasteries, the real sticking point was the abbots didn't want to play ball, not just because they had these enormous things at their disposal that it was up to them to look after, but because they couldn't swear allegiance to the king over and above the Pope in Rome. And so in 1535, on the 4th of May, which is a date now remembered in the Church of England as well as the Catholic Church, 3 abbots were executed, hung, drawn and quartered as traitors rather than heretics in Tyburn in London. And then 4 years later, They came for the bigger houses, including Glastonbury. And the problem is Cromwell sent his commissioners to look around because they thought, oh, wow, there's going to be lots and lots of goodies at Glastonbury. And then they get there and they go, where's all the money? Where's all the stuff? And so they then accused the abbot, Richard Whiting, of essentially hiding everything through all the monastic lands and in the other kind of places. And A, you can't blame him for doing that. That was kind of his job. And B, there was no evidence that he actually had done that. But he was dragged off to the Tower of London, and then he was dragged and tortured and interrogated. He was dragged back to Wells, which is not far from here. That's over there, which is the big cathedral city nearby. And then he was taken back. He was sentenced to death. He was attainted even before the House of Lords had met to actually rubber stamp this. And he was then put on a hurdle, dragged up the hill all the way to the top there, where he was hung, drawn and quartered. That means he was taken down from being hanged while still alive, cut into four, and his head was hung above the Abbey down in Glastonbury, and his other four quarters were hung up in Bath, in Ilchester, which is another Roman, ex-Roman town not far from here, and Bridgewater and the city of Wells, as a reminder to, I don't know, not start a monastery. But obviously there was a bit of a terror campaign going on. If you resist the royal supremacy, this will be you. So this is where it all happened. Let's just go up and have a look around, shall we? The view's pretty good. So what happened next? Well, the lands of the monastery were naturally all seized by the crown, and lots of monastery land was sold off immediately for money to pay for war with France. In this case, for Glastonbury, it was all given to the Duke of Somerset, who then set about trying to make a lot of money out of it. But of course, if you live by the sword, you die by the sword. The Duke of Somerset rose to ascendancy under Edward's son, Edward VI, and then he fell in 1551, and the lands were seized at that point and given to the crown. And the Abbey records apparently have been taken to Longleat, so that's where they are. In my day as a kid, we always were told there's more than just lions at Longleat. Well, apparently there's Glastonbury Abbey records as well. So one day I might go and have a poke around there and see what I can find. But of course, the legacy of the monasteries is amazing. It still seems incredible to me that this giant network of religious houses all over England should collapse so quickly. And although there was, of course, the pilgrimage of grace in favour of the monasteries and trying to turn back the clock, it didn't really take. And I think there's some really interesting questions to be explored there, which I hope to do over a bunch of other videos. If you have enjoyed this and you enjoyed thinking about it, then do come and look at Cary's Almanac. That's a weekly newsletter that I write, and I often look at English history and heritage and saints' days, all within the context of the Church of England as well, because I have the privilege and honour of being a member of the Church of England. So anyway, it's starting to get busy behind me, so I'm going to wrap it up there. Thanks for watching, and do subscribe if you enjoyed it, and join my newsletter, link below.